Now, 9 months after the announcement trailer that teased the return of a legendary Dragon Ball video game series, Dragon Ball Sparking Zero is almost here. But because I live in the land of bunning snacks and halal snack packs, which I couldn't seem to find on the demo's road tour map for some reason, I unfortunately haven't had the chance to try it out for myself. So like with many others, I've just been following the reveal trailers and announcements while having the same thoughts running through my head. Like, cool, the roster is huge, shame it was leaked, and wow, the beam struggles suck, why did they do this? Apparently this might have been fixed. I didn't really think there was anything interesting that I could talk about for a video that wasn't already being covered by dozens of other creators on the platform. So instead of spoiling all the fun by binging hours of pre-release footage from Bandai Namco's Chosen Z Warriors, I decided to celebrate in another way. After all, Sparking is the first game in the Budokai Tenkaichi style to be released in over 10 years, and so I thought, what better way is there to prepare for the hype than to play the last officially released Dragon Ball Tenkaichi game? And that's...
Become a Super Saiyan. Play Dragon Ball Z like you've never played it before. Dragon Ball Z for Connect.
Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we'll be playing Fortnite and cranking some 90s. I'm currently using the Gohan skin from Dragon Ball Super Superhero because I thought it looked pretty good, I guess. But I don't like what they did for his transformations. He starts in Ultimate and then can go Super Saiyan, but when you transform again, he goes back to Ultimate. I think this confused a lot of people who thought this was supposed to be his base form, because it ended up looking like he got a cooler animation just to power down, when it's actually a reference to this scene from the movie. I think Epic could have made this clearer if they had Gohan from Superhero with the messy hair, and then give him the ability to turn Super Saiyan and then Ultimate. But even though it's kind of disappointing that we didn't get Beast, I can see why they didn't include it, because you wouldn't be able to see anything past his hair. But at least we got his Beast Axe, which is... Wait, DBZ Connect isn't listed on the release timeline for the Tenkaichi series on Wikipedia. It doesn't count. Okay, great. That means the game we'll actually be playing is...
You're finished now! It's a spirit bomb, and you're gonna eat it! Fuck!
Dragon Ball Z Ultimate Tenkaichi was developed by Spike and released for the PS3 and Xbox 360 back in 2011. But despite the, let's say, lukewarm reception to the title, it was developed with the intention of being the very best Dragon Ball experience for fans and newcomers alike. And by the way, just putting this out there, the name Ultimate Tenkaichi is a lie. The game was called Ultimate Blast in Japan and was meant to cap off the Blast trilogy, but we got this title instead because the game's English name was chosen through a fan vote. And Ultimate Tenkaichi won because of course it did. It was one of 5 different titles we could have gotten, including Dragon Ball Z Tenkaichi Z, Saiyan Rising, Awakening Saiyans, and Saiyan Warriors. The marketing president for Bandai Namco at the time, Carlson Choi, said that their reasoning for reaching out to the fans was because that we are, and quote, the most passionate gamers and anime experts in the world. So in other words, he let us gaslight ourselves into thinking that this would be Tenkaichi 4. Nice. As for the Saiyan related names in the other choices, I assume that's because the player could make their own Saiyan OC in the game, which was a pretty cool addition, not gonna lie, because it was the first time we got a character creator in a console DBZ title, but we'll get more into that later. When the game was announced through a weekly Shonen Jump magazine with the working title Dragon Ball Game Project Age 2011, it came with screenshots of Goku and Vegeta duking it out in the game's new graphical style. The developers chose to depart from the typical anime cel-shaded look and instead go for what I always thought was supposed to be a manga-esque approach, like with Super Dragon Ball Z 6 years before it, but like if the manga was colored by a kid with a box of crayons. The visuals have this fluctuating quality where the colors blend well and look really good one second, and then they become muddy and oversaturated the next. If I had to guess, they probably did this to make the battles feel more cinematic, but the execution definitely could have been better. But I suppose odd visual choices do fall in line with the rest of the series, because as far as visual consistency goes, the Blast games weren't exactly the most focused. Raging Blast 1 had an anime-inspired look with its shading and colors, which is what you would typically expect from a game like this, while Raging Blast 2 decided to take the bloom dial and just crank it all the way up. The lack of consistency in the series was pretty jarring when compared to the Naruto Storm games, which were released at the same time. It feels like the team at Spike were trying to mix things up for the sake of making each game look just different enough to warrant full price annual releases for the series. But at least when it comes to the music, the Blast games never missed, and that includes Ultimate Tenkaichi. It had a great soundtrack with a ton of memorable songs that meshed perfectly with the quieter moments like with the menus or story mode, as well as the more action-packed battles in the game. I personally think the tracks here are better than what we have in games like Fighters or Kakarot, and I mean, just listen to some of these. The high-octane energy of the battle track sounds straight out of something like Dungeon Fighter. Wait. These are the same songs. Let's see. So Dungeon Fighter Duel came out in 2022, which was 11 years after Ultimate Tenkaichi, but the track Brawl of Hendon Maya was a remix of the song Purgatorium from Dungeon Fighter Online, which was released in 2005. Who worked on Ultimate Tenkaichi's soundtrack? Takao Nagatani. It says Nagatani was uncredited in Ultimate Tenkaichi, but the music of this game was featured in other Dragon Ball titles under his name, which is why he was added to the wiki. And Ultimate Tenkaichi was released in 2011, the same year that Yamamoto was exposed. I think we have a conspiracy here. To catch everyone up, there was a guy called Kenji Yamamoto who was a longtime composer for the Dragon Ball series. He worked on over a dozen entries for the franchise from the 80s up to the 2010s, with his involvement not just being limited to games and Ultra Nyan Extraordinary Cat Who Descended from the Starry Sky. Yamamoto also took the role of the main composer for the remaster of the Dragon Ball Z anime, Dragon Ball Kai. His work on the series can be heard from the Saiyan saga up until near the end of the Cell saga, at which point he was removed from the project. Toei ended up using Shunsuke Kikuchi's score from the original anime at the last minute to fill in the final few episodes of the show's run, while the music in the Buu saga was then done by Norihito Sumitomo when they got around to that 3 years later. But honestly, Yamamoto's music was pretty damn good. Most of my favorite songs from Dragon Ball games were composed by him, and that's probably true for a lot of fans of the Budokai series, but there was a little problem. A lot of his music was plagiarized, and I'm not exaggerating when I say a lot. There are at the very least over a dozen known instances of his rampant disregard for copyright laws, including songs from Black Sabbath, Metallica, and even movies like Avatar and Terminator Salvation. But Dragon Ball fans have been uncovering more as time goes on. These discoveries also retroactively affected older titles, which led to the soundtracks for the PS3's Budokai HD remaster, and later versions of Raging Blast 2 being replaced when they were released. If you want to take a closer look for yourself, Jack Slayer made a playlist aptly titled Yamamoto Steals, which contains over 130 songs which include the plagiarized works by Yamamoto and their inspiration. So I don't think it's a coincidence when Ultimate Tenkaichi was released in 2011 without a composer credited, the same year that Yamamoto's plagiarism was exposed. And considering the less than convenient timing, Bandai probably chose to scrub his name off the project and hope no one would notice instead of creating new songs. So what does this all mean? Well, besides the game's title being a lie and the music being stolen, nothing really, but we're off to a good start, aren't we? And we haven't even talked about the game properly yet, but I promise there was some good stuff in it. For what it's worth, Ultimate Tenkaichi was actually a very feature-rich game, which was a refreshing change of pace coming from Raging Blast 2. Because as you may or may not know, the Blast games weren't the most complete packages compared to their predecessor with Tenkaichi 3. The jump from the 6th to the 7th generation of gaming meant that the team had to try and remake in one game what they had previously built up across 3, to meet fan expectations, but this was an impossible task with just how much of a content behemoth the last title was. Unfortunately, the increased cost for HD game development and the limited time and budget left us with what most consider to be a lesser experience in every way. Now why does that sound familiar? While the combat mostly comes down to preference, the tweaks in the gameplay mechanics from Tenkaichi to Blast put some veteran players off. The roster was much smaller and was made of choice characters that the developers needed to prioritize in order to retell the Z portion of the story, and to their credit, they did a pretty good job with what they had, even if they chose to include a character like Chaozu instead of Ultimate Gohan. But when it came to the sequel, Raging Blast 2, Spike did the unthinkable and opted to not include the same story that every DBZ game had told over the last however many years. So what did they end up doing? It must have been something pretty amazing if it was good enough to replace the story mode, right? Nope. You got Galaxy mode. You chose a character and fought in a series of battles to unlock items. That's it. Well, I guess there was also the remake of Hachiak's story from the old Plan to Eradicate the Saiyans game from the 90s, which was pretty cool, I guess. But while the two titles sold pretty well, I think the tepid review scores they received made the developers realize that they needed to up the perceived value of the next entry to win players over. So even though Ultimate Tenkaichi turned out the way it did, which still didn't review particularly well, the developers went in with the full intention of the title living up to its name. It was the most ambitious Dragon Ball game at the time and featured returning and new ideas never before seen in the series. It had an original anime opening complete with Hironobu Kageyama's classic an appealing UI that was designed to look like you're using Capsule Corp tech, and there were even 2 story modes. The first one includes the entirety of Dragon Ball Z's 4 arcs as well as some movie and GT content. These were told through text scrolls, anime stills, in-game cutscenes, an explorable overworld with minigames, and even some newly reanimated moments from the show sprinkled throughout. As a first for the series, they also included QTE boss fights against giant characters like Great Ape Vegeta, Metacooler, Janemba, and Hirudegarn. I made a note hoping movie characters would be in Sparking Zero when recording the footage for this game, so I'm pretty happy with the last character reveal trailer. The second story is the Hero mode, which has you make your own character and play through an original scenario focusing around the Dragon Balls. While it is a bit of a short experience, it has additional boss fights against enemies who aren't in the main story, like Great Ape Baby Vegeta and Ultimate Shenron, who you need to snap back to his senses after he gets controlled by Omega Shenron. This battle was a great inclusion to the game because when else do we actually get to fight one of these noodle dragons? Even if our idea of saving him is to fly into his mouth and rip him up from the inside like Wargreymon vs Metal Seedramon. But while it was a fun idea, the character creator was considered very limited even at the time. You can only make a male Saiyan and choose from one of 3 body types, which not only dictates a character's stats but also which super moves they can use. It does end up feeling like they could have done more, but as a first attempt it was an interesting idea that Xenoverse would improve upon greatly by expanding the number of races and including female character options. The game also has the classic modes like an offline and online versus, a world tournament, customization, which gives you the option to change your character's aura, give them skills to improve various stats, and set what song plays at different points of the battle to make everything feel more cinematic. And a gallery where you can view character models with these weird squiggles next to them, play music, and rewatch cutscenes and replays. I found one I saved from 2012 where Goku has this fiery red aura, which I think I probably chose because I was hyped for Battle of the Gods. So if all these features were so amazing, what exactly went wrong with Ultimate Tenkaichi? Well, while they aced everything else, they fumbled on the most important part of a video game, the gameplay. I've mentioned a few times already that the team tried to make the game feel more cinematic, but while I understand the appeal that could have for its fans, it was definitely their biggest mistake. While players who preferred Tenkaichi's combat may have had issues with the changes made when the series shifted to Raging Blast, there were noticeable improvements made between the first and second game. So when the idea of a third title was being tossed around, it made sense to fans that the system would be polished even further. But for one reason or another, the team decided to take the game in a different direction. Maybe the focus on extra features left little room for the gameplay to be properly fleshed out. Or more likely, I suspect that it was done in an attempt to make the title more suitable for newcomers, which led to them prioritizing simulation over depth, which was a similar point of contention in the Godzilla game. I think they wanted the game to feel like Dragon Ball without the hassle of needing to learn a complicated battle system, which would only be a barrier of entry for anyone who would be picking this up as their first DBZ game. And that's probably why it wasn't called Raging Blast 3 in the first place. But for those who never played it, let me quickly explain the battle system.
1, 2, 3.
Huh? What? What in the world are they doing?
3, 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3.
Haha, that's not a joke. Ultimate Tenkaichi's gameplay threw away the freedom of movement and player expression found in the previous games, and implemented a more set-piece heavy experience. The game consists of 2 battle states, the common range and the blast range. Depending on which state the fighter's in, your attacks will either be punches and kicks or ki blasts, with both being performed by mashing the attack button. The rock paper scissors element comes in when you land a successful combo. You get a prompt where you need to select the opposite input to your opponent, and if you succeed, you get to deal extra damage by chaining follow-up attacks, which will then change ranges from common to blast or vice versa. Strangely enough, kind of like Pokken Tournament, which also had its field and duel phases, but that game had a lot more going on with its mechanical depth. Besides your normal attack, Ultimate Tenkaichi also has a smash attack, which you can use to break your opponent's guard and send them flying, as well as super moves which you can perform by landing attacks to raise your spirit, and once either player is at low health, you'll get access to an ultimate move. But instead of playing out in real time like in Tenkaichi or Blast, the supers and ultimates here are cinematic attacks that will pause the game and give the player on the receiving end a chance to block, dodge or counter, depending on how much ki they have. This game may as well have been fully turn-based. And now I want a sequel to Attack of the Saiyans. Of course, your ki can be charged like most other Dragon Ball games, and while it's odd not having it tied directly to your supers, they do look amazing here. Ultimate Tenkaichi special attacks and stage destruction are probably my favorite out of any Dragon Ball Z game visually, because depending on what type of super you use, the damage done to the stage will reflect accordingly. For example, a beam will tear through the scenery in the background and energy volleys will leave smouldering craters. And while these act as nothing more than set pieces, it does add an extra layer of fan service that I think all DBZ fans would appreciate. And honestly, after playing the game again, I have to say as much hate as people give the gameplay, I can see what the devs were trying to go for, and there is a bit of depth here. Because depending on what attacks you use, you can actively lower your opponent's spirit or ki. This means you can try and control the battle by affecting what they can and can't do during a match to pull things in your favor, but it's just not very fun. In the end, the gameplay feels very rigid and clunky, and the battles get repetitive really quickly from all the cinematics. The controls are borderline unresponsive and lock you into a combo animation with a single tap, while the movement in the common range is awkwardly short, leading to a lot of moments that feel unfairly punishing. And because this is the core gameplay we're talking about, it ends up affecting the better parts of the game as well. The comprehensive story mode was a great idea, but actually playing through the battles is a slog. The boss fights are interesting, but feel awkward in practice. If a game with this combat system was released as a separate title divorced from the Tenkaichi and Blast games, then maybe it wouldn't have been met with so much hate. But when you call it Ultimate Tenkaichi or Ultimate Blast and then change the gameplay completely, you can only blame yourself for disappointing the fans of those series. I feel like this formula would have worked decently well in arcades, but funnily enough, when Spike did make an arcade Dragon Ball game after this with Zenkai Battle Royale, it went with gameplay more like the Gundam Versus series, because this was during the time Bandai was trying to recapture its success, which is something I talked about more in the JJK Curse Clash video. But even saying all this, I don't think it's really fair for me to criticize Spike so much without giving some more context for why Ultimate Tenkaichi turned out the way it did. Because despite its flaws, I'm sure a lot of people enjoyed their time with it when the title was released over a decade ago, because I know I did. 2011 was during what is considered the dark ages of Dragon Ball. It was years after the series had ended and years before the new generation would pick up in 2013 with Battle of Gods, so the series was essentially in limbo. The IP was in such a poor state that Namco didn't consider it a big moneymaker, so Spike had to make do with whatever they were given and released this less than a year after Raging Blast 2. So while the choices with the gameplay were horribly misguided, Ultimate Tenkaichi still managed to give us classic moments from the anime remade, 2 story modes with boss fights, a character creator, and some pretty good, albeit stolen music. It was interesting going back to Ultimate Tenkaichi leading up to Sparking Zero, because after replaying this game, it almost feels like the dev team have been trying to do the opposite of what they did here, and really focus on what worked with the Tenkaichi games, being the gameplay and roster. And it's definitely working. It's still crazy to me that the series is coming back in such a strong way when this essentially killed the franchise. Sparking Zero has even beaten Call of Duty in pre-orders, which is unheard of for an anime game, and is looking to be the biggest launch for a Dragon Ball game ever. If Bleach Rebirth of Souls manages to stick its landing, then that'll be 2 of my biggest dream anime games made real. Just throw me off a cliff at that point, I'd be done with life. Okay, never mind. Alright, thanks for sticking around until the end. October is full of good stuff like Dragon Ball Daima, Bleach, Shadow Generations, and Venom 3, so I'll try my best not to get too distracted and upload again soon. I might also have a few medical things that I need to take care of, but don't worry about it. In the meantime, if you're getting Sparking Zero, maybe I'll see you online. Follow me on Twitter, go watch Transformers 1. Like if you liked it, subscribe if you're new. This has been Combo Trigger, but until next time, take care.